So I hope you have your microwave meals and drinks ready. I know a few of the panelists have got their drinks. I've got my usual bitter, and I believe Chris has got the same food on the menu as myself this evening, which is a packet of Pringles. But hopefully you've got your dinners ready. I think we'll get started. So I will firstly introduce Nicola Anderson, who is the Strategic Development Director from FinTech Scotland. She's been there nearly 2 years on secondment from the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. And Nicola will hopefully be discussing COVID-19 from a broader resilience perspective, and specifically how she's been working with companies, pivoting to stay relevant and and manage either their software or their companies in these challenging times. So please welcome to the stage, Nicola Anderson.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. I'm presuming everyone can hear me, and I'm going to take a nod perhaps as that's correct. So that's great. I seem to be starting lots of conversations these days with "Can you hear me?" As we think about this virtual world. So it's great to be here and connected in this virtual way, and thank you very much, Lee, for organising and for inviting me. It is my first supper club, it is fair to say, and I have come armed, not with supper, but with a drink. So I'm going to enjoy the evening and the conversation. So Nicola Anderson from FinTech Scotland as the Strategic Development Director, and really lucky to be there actually as I pivot and think about my own personal resilience and building up my understanding of how the financial services sector is changing, and building my understanding, as I said, of FinTech in particular. So this question then, does the path to greater resilience require a combination of increased regulatory compliance and trusted technology? It's a big question, I think you'll all agree. And I suppose as I've been mulling this over and thinking about what I'd say this evening, I don't think there's been a better time really than COVID-19. I'm sorry, I had a call coming in there. I hope that I didn't disturb the conversation. I was just saying that as I've been mulling over that question, I don't think there's been a better time to really answer this question about greater resilience at this time. So thinking about the question, I think the outcome we're looking for here is greater resilience. And if that's right, then I suppose the opportunity is to step back and think about, well, what is it we need to do to achieve greater resilience? And when I think about it in that way, I tend to come out with words like continue, ability to be able to operate, react, interact, deliver. All of those words come to mind. And then we think about the way we're working now and living now. We're certainly having to think about how we adapt, how we change, how we accept to a certain extent our circumstances, how we continue to play a part, and how we create or reinvent and think about ourselves in a different way. So part of that greater resilience is absolutely about adjusting, certainly about problem solving and reinventing how we deliver. And I think that leads me on nicely, if I can, to FinTech. That's certainly been helping the financial services sector adjust, reinvent, think about problem solving. And it has been around for years. It's certainly got a lot more profile more recently. But when I'm looking into things and wondering, how long it's been around, articles will talk about FinTech going back as far as the 1830s, as we think about the introduction of the telegraph and how we connect and communicated differently all the way back then. Up to closer times, the introduction of the ATM, we've always been associating tech, I suppose, with change, resilience, building that opportunity to reinvent and build that greater connectivity. And so that takes me right up to this present moment in time. So FinTech Scotland has around about 140 FinTech SMEs working in that community at the minute. We've seen a very resilient community react to COVID-19. We haven't had any real businesses that have had to stop or pause. They've been able to think about the capabilities that they have and think about how they would adjust and change. So they're looking at greater resilience through that ability to problem solve and to reinvent. So we're seeing greater resilience come through as they think about how they can support the SME market at the moment, particularly keen to help SMEs get a better handle on their money, their finances, a better overview generally of where their cash flow is, what they can think about for the future. We're seeing greater resilience as they think about the lending market. Really important that at this particular moment in time, as we think about not just resilience now, but resilience in the market in the future, we consider that conversation that's possibly necessary about affordability. And fintechs at the moment, as you will all know, with their capability, their tech and access to data, can really generate some really accurate insights to help us get a really clear picture. And they're also helping people build resilience as they think about personal finance and personal money. So that kind of is, they've set the scene quite nicely as we think about personal resilience. Thank you, thank you. I thought I'd lost the connection there. I promised Lee I would touch on how fintechs are pivoting, because I think that's a clear indication of the agility that's within that sector and the opportunity that they have to pivot. And I suppose that, Lee, I should have mentioned the poll questions that I had talked to you about, because as I was thinking about this, I was wondering, is it just fintechs that can pivot and adapt, or actually are the incumbent FS sector able to kind of innovate, or do legacy systems cause them to cause some difficulty there? So I'm curious about your views, please, on that question about innovation and legacy systems and what might need to change to kind of help us adapt to that. In the fintech space, we've been astounded by the fintech's ability to think about the capability that they have and to generally consider how they would change. So let me take you through some examples. We have a fantastic business in the fintech community in Scotland who is really working to try and make sure that people have access to vital services that they need, and legal services, financial services, helping somebody prove their identity and their ability to interact with those services in a digital world is the specific focus of that business. Now, of course, as COVID-19 hit, some of that business fell away. They had to really think about how they could maintain their income streams, and they pivoted really quickly, focusing on the NHS, and spent quite a lot of time now supporting NHS England and NHS Wales as they vet the newcomers and the returners to that system. So lifting their identification, verification capability from one sector right into another, pivoting really quickly and being able to adapt. We've also seen fintechs think about how they support the financial services sector, as many as we all have had to move virtually. So overcoming issues that you would need to think about in a physical space, such as signatures, how do you move away from wet signatures, that type of thing, really practical examples that they've been able to address and really support. And then as we think about the vulnerable customer position in particular, we've also had fintechs really consider how they could support the sectors like the credit union sector, get that sector much more digital so that they could continue to serve their customers. So those are examples, I suppose, of the back office, the B2B space, and that leaves the question, can you pivot and be resilient still if you're in the B2C space as a young, innovative company? And we're certainly seeing that as well. We've had FinTechs start to think about, again, how they could support the SME market, what they could do to help them navigate that huge volume of support from government support, local support, etc. What's best and applicable for their businesses and how they can get through that wealth of information quickly. So just being able to help somebody navigate that has been hugely helpful. And with FinTech capability through data analytics technology, they've been able to do that. They've also, as I've mentioned, helped SMEs hugely in thinking about their cash flow, managing their business, and thinking about that longevity of different sectors in the future. Probably one of my favourite examples, it is fair to say, because I am a lady who very much is interested in financial inclusion, and that reminds me, I guess, Lee, of my second question. As
shall I start it?
I'm very, very aware that my view, as well, maybe I'll not share my view, but I'm interested in your view as to whether or not FinTech can enable greater financial inclusion. But one of the businesses that we have really seen pivot and start to think about how they could support vulnerable customers and build resilience in people's finances as well, has been a business that has used their AI, tech, and data analytic capability with access to open banking and that ability to integrate into services, start to think about how they could help people understand if they would be entitled to universal credit or social security benefits. And that's been a huge driver. We've seen the debt sector here in Scotland really rally around that capability. Really interested in how that FinTech is supporting and working so that they can help support people in this most vulnerable time. So I've had my 5-minute warning and I will certainly move on. Thank you very much. So those are some examples of pivot, and I've possibly stretched the question, I absolutely accept. But it is I'm taking this broader view of greater resilience. And as we think about that, I think I'm stepping back and wondering, what does greater resilience really look like? I think at its heart, and it's my personal view, we come to things like trust. We have to trust the systems. We have to trust that they work. We have to trust the communications and the access, and that they're reliable. So trust is a huge thing as we think about greater resilience. I am of a view that security it forms a huge part of that trust, of course, and technology in the world that we work in at the moment. Technology certainly enables us to be more resilient, as long as it's secure and we trust it. But I'm going to add data. So data in a changing world will help us maintain our resilience. And as we think about access to data, and we think about how we use data, and think about the opportunities, I suppose, that data provides to really help us understand resilience and support people through COVID-19 and beyond, I think data is something we have to add into our thinking as we think about greater resilience. And finally, ultimately, I think we have to consider people, our teams, our supports, those people who work with us. People will really help us think about greater resilience. So it's not just about tech. So I'm going to pause there. I'm really interested to see what the polls have said, and I'm be happy to take any questions. I think I may have even saved a minute or two.
You've done very well indeed. I was going to interrupt you with breaking news. I've not had much time this week to generate any fake news, but Heinz Soup are introducing regulatory alphabet soup, I believe. Just came out literally a few seconds ago. But no, that was great timing. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for that awesome talk. We've got a few questions that have come in actually, and just conscious of the panel and how many we've got, I'll try and keep it moving, and maybe we don't video in unless people specifically say they want to. But we've got a question from Cheyenne around, for SMEs, seems like the focus for a lot will be on the survival in the post-COVID-19 era. When you are looking to survive, how do they focus, in your opinion, on tangential objectives like future resilience?
Oh, wow, there's a big old question.
I wish I'd chosen another one.
So, it's interesting actually. So many of the fintechs are SME businesses, small, innovative businesses. And as they think about how they survive, they have been really thinking about the broader capability that they have and the breadth, you know, how agile they could be and where they could focus their attention to kind of move and make sure that they have income coming in. So they have that ability to be a horizontal, I would say. We're very much starting to think of fintech as more of a horizontal across a number of different sectors, as opposed to just a vertical, perhaps, in financial services. And so with that ability, you know, there's that opportunity to really think about continued income stream. And connected to that is the need to be able to continue. That continuity is vital. So those and the need for secure systems and access to resources, all of those types of things are front of mind. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. That was a great answer. I was just seeing more coming in, so if you saw me looking to the side, I was reading those to try and prepare you for the next one. We have one from Bill Sterling, actually, who was asking, Nicola, do you think the fintech sector is proving to be resilient now by design, or is it easier for them because they are smaller and less complex?
It's really interesting, actually. I think there's an element of this, and I know that others on the panel and others speaking will have a view too. So my perspective on this, I think many of these SMEs are used to knockbacks or failures, if you like, as you start to build your business and you start to build that proposition. Especially if you're starting from a zero or a base position. So that ability to be able to overcome a setback is there right from the beginning. So I think that personal resilience is very, very helpful in that space. I did have another point, but could you remind me of the question so I could remember what I was saying?
I think you answered it. It's fine. What we can do is I think I mentioned before, we can gather some answers to these post-event and I'll circulate, so that's fine. I think we've got quickly time for one more, I think, before moving on. This is from Terence Lee. I'd like to hear FinTech Scotland's suggestions on what UK financial service firms should be doing right now to prepare, I can't even speak tonight, to prepare for the supervisory authority regulations expected in 2021. Again, a big question, but
that is a big question. I think I think the FCA has been very clear actually about what its priorities will be through a number of different publications, really. And Chris Woolard yesterday, for example, has just launched another podcast where he articulates some of the priorities for the future. But it's running through many of that will be Chris, funnily enough, describes it as they're trying to create a bridge between two halves of this crisis. So we are currently dealing with the health half of the crisis, and we now need to think about, well, what might the economic half of this crisis look like? And so as we think about our responsibilities within the financial services sector to customers in particular, and the vulnerability that this crisis will definitely have caused, I'm sure, there's that opportunity to prepare to support that vulnerability, I think, is certainly something to consider.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for that great speech.